Hello, I'm Corey Hixson, and I'm the treasurer for an organization called the Alliance for Public School Technology Resources. Primarily, it's a non-government organization that's designed to accept donations from businesses and then refit the technology that's donated to be given to public schools and non-for-profit organizations. As a part of my schoolwork, I've been asked to talk to you about measuring the impact of a successful teacher. First, I would like to discuss a little bit what really creates expertise. As a teacher, you really, not only for the purposes of perceived credibility, but also to continue developing in your career, would like to make it so that your career is one that develops into expertise and one that really has that genuine passion and love for accomplishing the things that you do while instructing. A researcher named Vander Heiden, who I had to research in previous coursework, had stipulated 3 different factors that contributed to the successful development of expertise. The first, of course, was career initiative. If you're going to be a teacher, you should have some idea who it is you would like to work with and what it is you would like to teach them, because it is very difficult work. And then also, it shouldn't be something that you're just trying to do because you want to appear generous or you want to appear noble in society, although we all agree that teachers ought to hold a noble place in society. You really have to want to do it. You have to love to tell people about things. You have to be able to love doing public presentations and speaking, giving lectures, and making sure that your students are learning from what you're doing. And you have to really want to have that light bulb moment come on over a student's head when that aha moment happens. If you really like to see that, that helps keep your initiative going in a pretty difficult workforce. And so if you've got that internalized, in motivational terms it's called intrinsic motivation to teach, that will move you in the direction of expertise. The second is network participation. If you're going to be a teacher and you're an educator, you need to collaborate with peers. And you need to have around you a community of educators who form a network that can support you and develop your educational goals for you, the other stakeholders in the community, such as employers and parents, as well as the students. So you need to put yourself in that place of being in a community and being ready to become a part of it by empowering the larger community through participating with the professional networks that you're part of. And thirdly, you really have to keep going with professional development. There's really not many educators, I think, who believe that they have everything in their field understood. And this is what keeps people learning. There's always a need for continuing research and professional development. And what educators really need to focus on lately is the ability to collaborate. We have kind of a crisis in that our educational materials are either difficult to obtain or regulated by fair use, or perhaps not the ones that are approved when directly associated with core curriculums. So when we sort of coalesce and we come together to start peer reviewing the presentations that we create as a community, as a group, if I were to create a presentation on using music in education, and then be able to share it with peers who would then review it and give me feedback and ideas about how well the materials on music education work, then I would be then able to go and educate other instructors based on the materials that we had developed as a community, which is very important because it provides the peer review and networking opportunities as well as the support to maintain initiative for developing expertise. So another thing that you really need to know is I chose this format in order to present this information because it's interactive, and I can give you a lot of information about how this system works for, educating students on how to create music. But that's not the focus of this presentation. The format is. The format of this presentation is, I believe, the best way to present all of the information I'm about to give you, which is something that teachers really need to be able to do. Sometimes there is nothing that can quite replace a good lecture. This, however, is more of a lab exercise. And what these machines are designed for is so that a student can experiment with the different kinds of tools for music making and the machinery that might be used. And this instrumentation can record sound from any other type of instrument that can be recorded. But what it does is the student can spend time in the lab creating music with a more difficult system to understand than some of the ones that are perhaps more expensive. And this in many ways facilitates deep learning. So I choose this format for teaching music composition because there is a number of different interfaces that the student can interact with to write music in her or his own personal way. And the reason I bring up music education is because musicians, when they're writing songs, must collaborate. I'm going to have a very difficult time using this drum track for a song if another musician has not used his instrument to go along with the rhythm that's in the drum track. Similarly, if you're an educator, it's very important to be able to collaborate. So you see that there are a number of congruences between music making, and teaching and educating. So music is to teaching like music making is to professional development. We need to be able to work together to create materials and technologies that will assist in our endeavors in creating really intrinsically motivated, community-focused learning that happens among all of the participants in the classroom. Once students begin to understand the instruments that they're capable of working with, likewise, once educators be able to understand the technologies that they're able to work with, people can begin to work together to fill in their part of creating the educational materials, or likewise, the music. It's very much the same thing. So it's important to be able to create an environment for creativity. It would be very difficult to ask people to learn if they were not able to exercise their own skills for developing an epistemology and their own skills for creating learning that happens among peers, especially during discussions. So you see, the best way to do this is perhaps to encourage the students who are having difficulty keeping up with the rest of the group, and also to share the experience of students who perhaps on the formative assessments and other assessments that you can create have shown that they have progressed a little more. In this way, the students can work together to create kind of a mean average of understanding throughout the course as a community. And being able to facilitate that means being open to things that are not necessarily just laboratory exercises or assessments and quizzes or lectures, but also allowing people to collaborate and communicate, which is one of the most difficult things to do. Also, in the larger community, as students and teachers are stakeholders in the larger community, teaching becomes a process of social change. And so when you are creating this community of learners and you're monitoring their progress according to standards that are established by the state and the county, you are also inspiring them to learn in the direction that's required, but also in the direction that helps them contribute to the larger community. And as people are working together in groups, they tend to develop something called social capital. This is a book by Mr. Paul Loeb, and it really deals with examining social change and how attitudes in society and social activity that's communal and collaborative help to contribute to the changes that society eventually brings about through social change. So being aware of that responsibility as a social change agent is very important to know what issues to focus on and to bring into the discussion in a classroom, depending, of course, on the subject. And so for that awareness, it's really good for expert teachers to be able to understand the larger ecology. Daniel Goleman is a person who created something called Ecological Intelligence, which is interesting in and of itself. But what it is basically is an understanding of your presence in the larger community and the impacts that you have on the larger ecology. And he includes all factors of ecology. As teachers, we're looking at the ecology of learning. So when you're in a classroom and you're educating students and teachers and working together in professional development to also educate teachers and be educated by teachers, you put yourself in a place of being a part of a larger community that is also kind of an ecology of learners, where everybody has their own set of expert skills that also work together to create a greater expertise for the overall community as a team. Now, of course, this is great that everybody can work together and collaborate and be able to share things in order so that learners who do not know certain aspects of the learning can learn it from another student or a teacher, or experts who do have expertise have the opportunity to demonstrate mastery by sharing that expertise with students who haven't mastered it yet. So it helps, but there must be a way to measure it. So I created, of course, a series of pre and post assessments. One, of course, is a confidence inventory. It's based on a Likert scale. And the reason I chose a confidence inventory was because I felt that measuring content knowledge was not getting a complete picture of the functioning of the classroom. A student who begins with this kind of instrumentation, these instruments, is not going to feel very confident working with the machines at first. So if I broke down, according to a standard, everything that I wanted to teach about this technology, and then unpacked those standards and measured them, the student would be able to self-report whether or not she or he felt comfortable in each of the unpacked variations of the standard. So each part of each standard would be measured according to a student's self-report. And that overall confidence indicator can then tell me whether or not the student is feeling more comfortable with the learning material or less comfortable. There are two errors that can happen with this kind of assessment. The first is some information is intimidating. If you're looking at this machine, there is sheet music here. Not a lot of people can read sheet music. It may be intimidating at first, and that might kind of result in a lack of confidence. But as people learn more about it, they understand the sheet music itself, but then they go look at other artists. And that may then also reduce the confidence level a little bit more. Excuse me. So the error that can occur is as a student is learning, they may discover that there's more to learn. The other error is that some students like to report perhaps what the instructor would like to hear. So there is still a role for assessments that involve content knowledge, but it is very important to keep track of how confident students are in participating in the learning, both with laboratories and cognitive assessments, and also in participating with the learning during discussion and social aspects of the classroom that are contributing to the communal learning and the communities of inquiry, which is really kind of a constructivist epistemology. People begin to develop their own expertise together as a group by creating an inquiry and then sharing the learning and the learning skills that are required to obtain the knowledge and then develop it further. So it's a pretty good example, but what you really need to know is whether or not the techniques that you're using with the community, with the cognitive assessments, with the laboratory assignments and performance tests, is whether or not everything is working. So it's good to be able to measure before and after a class term. I like to run confidence inventories once a week or so. And I've also developed on my website, www.dxed.org, which is probably where you're viewing this presentation, a way to score the assessments in order to measure them according to 5 different aspects of each core curriculum standard that had then been unpacked for each course plan. So it's a really good way to kind of stay in touch with how students are performing by observation. The other thing that the assessment does is it asks for feedback. One of the other things that it's really important to be able to do as a teacher is to communicate. with the students and with other professionals and with stakeholders in the larger community. These are skills, excuse me, that often come from other areas of expertise. Some of the places to look for skills about how to best communicate with people can come from experiences like volunteering or from other fields such as case management or crisis intervention. I volunteer for the American Red Cross, and I do casework in the field for people who have dealt with a disaster. The reason for this is this helps me interact with people on a one-to-one level at times when there is a crisis and where I need to be able to use all of my skills to look at everything from the audience's perspective or from the client's perspective. And so in that way, I learn better communication skills for being in front of an audience and for having audience empathy and communicating. For additional information on communication skills, there are some presentations available on my website. We all believe in our students, and sometimes it may be difficult to make it so that we're sure that students can work together as a group. But because there may be some biases and some conflicts and some issues that may occur in a classroom does not mean that a particular student is not capable of becoming knowledgeable in the course material. So another skill set that comes from another discipline that must really be part of the expertise that we need as a teacher is conflict management and conflict mediation. It's necessary to be able to manage conflict and to bring cultural aspects into the classroom that can help mitigate conflict that may exist between students and between students and opinions, especially lately, from the surrounding culture. So a good way to look into that is to begin to understand conferencing processes. Sometimes bad information comes from criminal justice. There's a system called circle processes, which help to facilitate discussion at times when there may be conflicting opinions happening in a discussion group. But it is important to remember that all of the students have equal weight in a communities of inquiry, and they're all capable of learning the material very well, so long as the conflicts do not interfere with the progress of the community of learning as a group. One way to assess and manage performance of a learning group is to actually ask the learning group whether or not the learning group is performing very well, and if they have any feedback as far as if the discussions could go better, or if the lectures could be working better, or if the equipment, the technology that's being used, or the materials that are being used could be better. So it's always good to ask actually the students what would help better engage their learning. But in this way, it's possible to be sure that all contributions from all of the stakeholders in the classroom are capable of reaching the criteria for success in the course being taught. One of the ways to really get past the surface of a lecture is to present information that gets into deeper areas of study that perhaps students would feel intrinsically motivated to go and then learn more about. The concept surrounding communities of inquiry, especially in blended learning formats, was one of creating an environment for creativity and what's referred to as epistemic engagement. That is, where the group of students gets to collaborate well enough that they feel that they should be motivated to bring more knowledge to the group and to go and study beyond the surface knowledge that may be a part of the course standards or requirements. So it's interesting to always bring in areas of knowledge that maybe are not completely discussed entirely by the group, but that can help contribute to a student's motivation to then go and create more epistemologies and gain more knowledge about a particular subject in order to bring it back to the group and present it as something that's relevant to the course standard. Another thing that I like to do is, as you can see, this is a very complex machine. It's designed for teaching music, and I mentioned before the connection between making music and collaborating on creativity and learning and collaborating on learning and creating learning materials, both as professionals and as students. But it's very complicated. Well, the reason that it's very complicated is that this particular type of machine is more difficult to understand intentionally, because as students begin to master this kind of studio recording equipment, they can then go and be involved in recording with studio equipment and other equipment as a musician perhaps, or any other field of study that requires technology, and be able to easily understand what concepts are involved in the use of that equipment. So by creating something that's more complex, I've asked the student to dive deeper into concepts and areas of learning that are not necessarily required in order to make music. Similarly, when bringing new knowledge to the classroom, it's nice to be able to bring in more complex information from current research that challenges students and creates what's called a source of challenge, so that when they're asked to meet the course standards, they've already created an epistemology and understood a concept that's above and beyond the course standard that's being asked for. And so this kind of also facilitates deep learning as students individually begin to network the ideas that they've been exposed to in the course. They can then create more connections with other areas of their life that may be equally important, and internalize the desire to acquire more knowledge and learn, and bring it back to the group as I had said before. So, in closing, the summary is that collaboration is essential to effective education. What we're really trying to do is create an environment for learning, but better to put that as creating an environment for creativity and for further development as individuals and as individuals who are members of groups. In other research, I've also studied a great deal how belonging to a group can be very motivating. So I mentioned that students may want to bring additional knowledge to the learning group. Similarly, teachers really need to be intrinsically motivated to want to disseminate knowledge to a learning group. And this allows for that sense of belonging and efficacy that is so motivating. In social psychology terms, it increases self-esteem. In attribution theory of motivation terms, it increases self-efficacy and the belief that we're being effective. So overall, I've covered the way to identify the best way to give a presentation, the proficiency for creating learning groups and developing an optimal environment for creativity, how to create assessments to monitor learning and to receive feedback, as well as to ensure that the learning in the learning community is fair and equal, and that all students who participate have the equal opportunity to achieve. I'm Corey Hixson, and thank you for viewing my presentation.